Welcome, everybody, to the CFF List Best and Worst Performer Predictions for Week 4. I'm Jay Mill. I got my partner, Willie B, as usual. How's everything going, Willie?
Going really well. Going to have it nice and tight this week.
Nice and tight, the way we like it. Yeah, I guess we will jump right in. Week 3, weren't a lot of big matchups. You had your usual fantasy excitement, of course, a few injuries. We'll touch on all of that as we go through the position by position year to date leaders. But to begin, uh, we'll take a quick look at the season standings. What you are tuning into, if it's your first time, is our review of the year to date leaders at each position for college fantasy football and our assessment of who among the year to date leaders will have the best and worst weeks for this upcoming week 4. We'd like to make a competition out of it. So if we pick someone who scores in the top 3 at a position, we will get points starting with 3 points for picking the best performer, 2 points for picking the second best, 1 point for the third best, and then the inverse of that for the worst picks, 3 points for picking the absolute worst pick among the group, etc. So, based on that, last week Willie maintained his lead and actually widened it. Uh, Jay Mill, that's me. I had outscored him 9-4 week 1, but that's far in the rear view now. He killed me in week 2, 3-12. And then collectively, like we had some big gaps in week 1 and 2 between the two of us, but collectively we did fairly good as a unit this week. But I still lost 6-8. Willie really hit on the wide receivers this week, which again we'll cover. Kind of where we scored our points as we go through each position. But as it stands year to date, Willie B holds a 6-point lead at this point, 24-18. So I've still got work to do here to catch up, and did a little bit of correcting this week to go from 3 to 6 points. So hopefully my trend continues up, and we want Willie B to do as well. Also, I'm not rooting against him. I just hope I can do as good or better than him, so we can give you guys, the best advice on, who you should be looking not only to sit and start, but who potentially you might just want to forget about for the rest of the season because maybe they're on the list as a fluke. We know that the end is coming, or maybe it's the opposite. They might have just appeared on the list. You might think they're a fluke, but we might be able to convince you that they're the real deal and they're here to stay for the remainder of the season. So, with that said, Willie, let's jump right into the tight ends, unless you've got some general comments on, week 3 and the games that we saw.
No, let's just jump right into it. I mean, especially with the tight ends, because we had so many with that bye, so many new names that were, in the top
Right.
20 as far as fantasy, as a whole. So I am very interested to see, the changes and everything that's coming for week 4.
Yeah, and tied in, there are some interesting notes. But again, we'll start with our recap of our predictions last week. There were 4 tight ends out of the 12 with a bye, so we noted that we only had to pick our best and worst from among 8 players. And I had mentioned last week if we didn't do so well, it wasn't going to be good because we only had 8 to choose from, and we should be able to pick the best and the worst maybe a little more easily, or at least get in the top 3 when we're only choosing from 8. Sadly, the only point on the best side was me picking Royer, who ended up being the third best tight end of the week. He was number 12 on the year to date list, averaging 13.9. He's managed to be consistent now for a third week in a row. He's not lighting it up, but he's in that kind of 11 to 12. He had 11.7 this week. He's right in that 11 to 13 points per game wheelhouse. And again, very, very consistent. A lot of people I know went and picked him up last week as a result of his first 2 weeks. So he probably isn't available, but looks like, based on his consistency in the 3 weeks, he's going to be one of those guys that is here to stay. Uh, he was behind Beck, who I happen to pick as the worst performer. But boy, was I wrong. I totally misjudged the lack of usage he had in that Long Island University game, where they clearly just didn't target him because they dominated in that game so much. But he was back to an even higher level than he had in week one, which was in the 20s. Beck, who was the number 10 tight end, ended up with 35 points. And boy, was I wrong, predicting him as the worst. I am now a Beck believer. I was not last week, so I will be on the Beck train. And Kuthi, uh, we thought it was odd. Maybe he had been hurt again in week two because he really just totally disappeared after a really strong week one as the best tight end in week one. Um, just kind of fell to the bottom of the list practically, all the way down to number 8 from number one from week one to two. But it was good to see him get another double digit game as the second best tight end this week with 12.3. So whatever happened in week two will remain a mystery. But it does look like they still plan to target him consistently. And as far as the worst performers went, Bowman just totally disappeared against Oklahoma. Um, he I think had one target in the game. Otherwise, was just totally shut down. Helm from Texas was the second worst tight end. He was number 10 and finished at 5.9 points. And then, really surprisingly, this was Willie B's pick to be the best. Was Loveland only had 6 after a really, really strong first 2 weeks. Also, um, Helms maybe not as much as a surprise. We talked about how Texas has just got too many targets to focus on one guy as the main guy there, and maybe if you've got him in best balls, it works out better. But Helm is going to be competing with a lot of receivers for targets, so the 5.9 really isn't quite as surprising. I think it'll be tough for him to remain on this list all season long. You might see him pop in and out based on some big games here and there, but 5.9 really wasn't a shock. But the thing that stood out to me, I don't know if you had caught this earlier in the week, Willie. I had mentioned that 16 of the top 20 tight ends this week are rostered on less than 25% of teams. 16 out of the top 20 week 3 performances, which tells me that nobody knows what to do. Nobody's going to know what to do at tight end, so far this season because there's been so much turnover. And so many unknown guys are having the big games, like 16 out of 20 in the top 20. And 12 of those are rostered on less than 10% of teams, 12 of those 16 that had the top games this week. What does that signal to you as far as the state of tight ends in college fantasy football? Are there just teams using multiple tight ends more? Is it just a crop of new younger guys coming up? Any idea of what's going on here at tight end?
I wouldn't say that necessarily it's a crop of younger guys. I mean, because the guys who showed out in week three, I mean, the bulk of these guys are upperclassmen.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's to me, it's a matter of that there's just not that, the big name tight ends that we're used to.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there aren't as many.
Right.
And then the one or two that we do have,
Yep.
they're just not dominating quite yet, which, I expect that to come. I mean, just like last year when we were talking about Brock Bowers and he needs to do this, he needs to do that. Well,
Mm-hmm.
he ended up doing that.
Right.
And then he's also doing it at the next level. So I think it will straighten itself out. But to see, what 11, well, maybe a dozen tight ends,
Mm-hmm.
almost over 15 points. That tells you something when, Royer right here is averaging, before this week, he was averaging 13.9. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And again, like if 15 guys had over 15 points, and I'm telling you that 16 of the top 20 are rostered on under 25%, that
mhm.
means that most of those guys who had more than 15 points this week came out of nowhere. Because I tell you, if go ahead and move to the up-to-date year-to-date list, what you won't see on the new year-to-date list is a bunch of new guys. So the bulk of these guys who had the big games this week, it was their first time to have a big game this season. That's why they're not rostered on a high level of teams. and that's why they didn't work their way into the top 12 for this week, because there are only two new names in the top 12 this week, even though you had so many unrostered guys, have these top performances. You would think, okay, a lot of these unrostered guys had big games. They're going to knock a lot of these other guys out of the top 12. Well, that's not what happened, because they just came out of nowhere in week 3. So I would say, if you're looking at that list, you gotta wait until a track record begins to accumulate before you jump on these tight ends that suddenly had 15 points, and maybe they only had 2 points in week 1 and 5 points in week 2. But there is one exception maybe to that rule, and there's just no way you can ignore him, and that is Stowers from Vanderbilt, who I believe is popped in here. Where's he at, Willie? What number is Stowers at?
He's number 10. He's popped up from
Yeah, there he is.
62.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he came all the way up from 62 to 10. The reason I'm saying he's one of these guys that's rostered on a really small percentage of teams that you should pay attention to is because he had 17 targets this week. And I don't know where it came from. I don't know the story behind that, honestly. But it did raise my eyebrows enough that I wanted to see kind of where he came from, who he is, what is his history. And he did have a solid season. He's a transfer from New Mexico State. He was previously at Texas A&M before that, so he's moved around. But at New Mexico State last year, he had 35 catches. He just didn't have a lot of touchdowns. He only had 2 touchdowns. So, the fact that he had the targets at New Mexico State, he's now at a bigger school. We can't, again, tell you why he was targeted so minimally in the first 2 weeks, and suddenly he had 17 in week 3. But when a guy gets 17 targets, that doesn't seem like a flash in the pan to me. What do you think about Stowers here from Vanderbilt, Willie? Is he a guy that people should be looking to go after? Clearly, if you absolutely have a tight end that's averaging, less than 8 points a game, he's a guy you could take a chance on. But if you've got 2 tight ends in your team that are averaging 9 or 10 points, Willie, do you cut any of them to go get a guy like Stowers with his 1 week of big targeting, or how do you treat a guy like that if you're
Well, I still treat it with a grain of salt, but with some of these rosters and the way that you're allowed to build and stack, if you're carrying 3 tight ends, why would you not, try to take
take
a
a
flyer
chance?
on a guy like this? Right, right. I
Right.
mean, 17% rostered.
Yep.
He does have a red flag, which means, maybe that's just, the amount of targets that he received, and
Yeah.
was it a thing of that Georgia State is just that bad,
Right.
versus the position, and
Right.
all he did was just eat on the linebackers and whoever else came in his way.
Yeah. Well,
But
it was enough. It was enough to get on our radar, and it was enough to push him all the way from 62 to number 10 with the performance that he had.
mhm,
So he's averaging 13 a game. Um, but as far as the other new name, because we told you Bowman and Helm are out. Um, Stowers is in from Vanderbilt, and then you've got a name that people are a lot more familiar with that they expected big things from last year, which is Mason Taylor from LSU, uh, who I think is producing the way everybody thought he would last year when he was a bit of a disappointment. He's come out of the gate with 13.2, 8 points, and then 17.8 this week, which gets him up to a 13 points per game average, and has him tied exactly with Stowers with 13 points a game at the number 10 spot here, among the tight ends on the year-to-date list. Um,
yeah.
but
So,
yeah, I
so
think he's a
if I had
name you can count on.
yeah, if I had to choose between the two, I would say Taylor, only because, when you saw that dip of him get that 8 points, that was against Nickel State. So,
Right.
um, his number to me is a little bit more believable.
Yeah, yeah. And
So
he's got 21 targets to go along with the points, so he is being targeted very consistently for a tight end. Um, the other, before we make our picks here, you've got Gadsden. Well, 4 of these guys had buys. Gadsden and Fannin are holding the top spots down. Beck moved from 10 up to number 3. Brenningstool has been, again, he's another one of those guys that has been consistent from Clemson. Uh, but he had a buy, so he benefited from the buy and moved from 6 to 4. And then, yeah, same thing for Tyler Warren. he's there tied with Brenningstool. He also moved from 6 to 4 because they were tied last week. Loveland dropped a little bit at number 6. Royer moved up a little bit, and then Max Clare uh, dropped a little bit from 4 to 11. But again, not too much turnover, even though there were a lot of new names at the top of the list. But with that said, Willie, maybe I bought you some time. I think I went first. You went first week 1. I went
No,
first
I mean
last week.
it's no, it's the same thing. I mean, you're behind, you go first.
Oh, okay,
So
okay. So
that you know,
all right. So I'm going to get the benefit. Okay.
yeah, you'll get the
Um,
benefit.
all right, all right. Well, I don't, put a lot of faith in these numbers that Fantrax has, but they do have the numbers there for a reason to kind of guide you through, how certain positions are doing against teams. And you got a lot of guys playing teams that are ranked pretty poorly against a tight end. Brenningstool jumps out as a guy who has a pretty good matchup against NC State. They're 103rd. Um, so I think I'm going to lean towards him. Again, I like his consistency in the 2 games that they've had this year. He's become a favorite target of Cade Klubnik. So let's go with Jake Brenningstool.
All right. Since you're picking best, hmm, I'll go with the guy at I'll go with the guy at the top. I mean, I still don't think Stanford is where they need to be. Gadsden and that offense seems to be clicking a little bit better. Maybe hopefully
Mm-hmm.
found a little bit of their identity
Yep.
with the bye, and you know, like I say, it's time for him to show what kind of draft stock he's really going to have, and
Mm-hmm.
he needs to have it start this week against Stanford.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I was looking at him like probably it's hard to go wrong with Gadsden, but so I can't blame you for that. Um, I probably owed Beck a pick there for favorite, but I just couldn't bring myself to do
Right.
it. But I think he's playing at SMU. Just a real quick note, like, good Lord, let's see what happens to R.J. Maryland there at SMU. He's really been caught up in that quarterback shuffle as the odd man out as far as receiving any benefits. As they try to figure out who the
Hmm.
quarterback is. Hopefully, now that they've settled on one, you'll see R.J. Maryland pick back up in terms of his production because that's been really disappointing. Just looking at
Yeah.
a name who's not on this list. But as far as my worst performance. That's a little tough because everybody here, I feel has earned their spot and is, really solid. And I really don't want to go against Fannin up at the top. He's playing Texas A&M. They might be a little bit out of their league in that game, but he's proven too much over the years. How solid he is. Um, so I think I will go with Max Clare, the guy at the bottom against Oregon State. Um, I just everybody above him. Uh, with the exception of maybe Eli Stowers, has shown some consistency. Uh, I'm very curious to see what 17 targets in Stowers will do this week. But I think everybody on this list is going to have a pretty solid game. Be surprised if there's much turnover. So I'll have to take Max Clare as my prediction for worst performer out of these 12.
Yeah, that's interesting that you did that because I want to say I think I thought about it last week, and his 3 for 36. I mean, that's a perfect candidate to be here
Yeah,
in this
yeah, he had
spot.
he had 6.6 points last week, so he's starting to looks like maybe go down in terms of. I mean, we're only 3 weeks in, so you can't necessarily say he's starting to go down. But
Hmm.
based on again the favorable matchups a lot of these tight ends have, um, and then the fact that they're all above him, they're above him for a reason at this point. He only had 6.6 last week, so
Yeah,
let's see who you got there for your worst.
yeah. As far as like, you know, I know we try to pick different guys.
Hmm.
Yeah, he's coming off of a bye also. Man, this is a tough one.
Yeah, it's tough.
Um,
Are you agreeing with me? It's tough because you're seeing like a lot of potential in a lot of these tight ends in the top 12 here, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
And then like I said, and so with Max is the only one that's really not getting all the targets. I mean,
right, right,
so we look at a guy like Eli, he's probably playing against one of the tougher defenses, I guess, if we would say that, because they go to Missouri,
right,
but
right.
with that, like you said, that's target share, it's really hard to choose him.
Right. Yeah, because you're
So
expecting like even if it's cut by a third, he'd still get 5 or 6
hmm
targets, and
yeah.
yeah, for
And
Eli
and and
Stowers.
since and since it is tight end and we have four less players to choose from, I'm just going to go ahead and stack that Max Clare. Just
Okay.
stay away from him.
All right. So we're both saying stay away from Max Clare, um, and we're sticking to it. Yeah, I've got Brenningstool. Willie B's got Gadsden as the guys to put your money on. So with that, we will now look at the performances of the wide receivers last week. This group was also pretty consistent about the players on the list having solid performances, remaining on the list. Um, or I should just say, there wasn't a lot of movement once we get to the up to date year to date list. There was only 3 guys out of the 16 that have moved out. Um, but in terms of top performers, this is where Willie B, um, hit a home run. He had selected Nash. Nash came out and got 57.5 points, which I believe was that a new season high or the second best of the season? I can't. Oh yeah, no. McMillan had 60 something in week 1 for Arizona. So yeah, second best receiver performance of the week by Nash against Kennesaw State. That's what Willie B told you would happen. That's exactly what happened. I picked Felton, who was your number 1 receiver going into week 3. He finished with 26.7 points as the third best receiver. And then Travis Hunter, he was averaging 29.6. He had a 35-point game and keeps proving he's the man there at Colorado. Those were your top 3. As far as your bottom 3, uh, my prediction for the worst ended up being the third worst, which was Wysong. We didn't like the matchup against Auburn. I got a point for that. Steered you away from him. And Willie B had a little bit tougher pick, I would say. It wasn't quite as obvious, but he steered you away from Donovan Green, who absolutely was the worst receiver from the top 16. He only had 3.4 points last week. Um, so again, kudos to Willie B for getting the maximum of 6 points at the wide receiver position. How you feeling about yourself there with those picks?
Um, Probably maybe got a little bit lucky with the Donovan Green, but I mean he was 16th on the list, so I mean
Yep,
you gotta if it's right there in your face, you just gotta
you got to take it.
stick to stick to what's being true as far as the list,
Yeah,
and
but he
as
was
far as
playing
Nick
Ole
Nash,
Miss.
he's
Yeah, you
yeah,
pointed out
that
that
is
he was
true.
playing Ole Miss
Yes,
also, and
right.
pretty tough defense there. So I think you used a little bit of logic. Give yourself a little more credit than you
All
are.
right, I'll take this pat on the back real quick.
Okay. Um, Now the 3 names you'll see leaving while we're here. It's 2 that we talked about. Wysong and Green are out. The third name that didn't make it is Josh Kelly. He only had 11.6. He was your number 14 wide receiver, so he's out. Um, but just kind of a quick glance. McMillan at number 2 had 24.8 points. He bounced back, after 60 something in week 1. He had single digits in week 2. Now he was back with kind of probably what I would say is going to be a normal type game for him with 24.8. But yeah, we'll go through a few more of these as we look at the now new top 16 wide receiver list, Willie. So we want to move it up to that. And the big changes here, we've got, again, 3 new guys. The biggest jump was Devontae Ross moving from 92 to 16 after scoring, I believe, 37 points this week. But he's had 23 points in week 1. He dipped to 6 points in week 2. But that is a name that I've mentioned on the waiver watch draft. With one receiver out fighting cancer, a couple other receivers transferring out. He is your clear wide receiver one there at Troy. He's available in quite a few leagues still. And after last week's performance, he's probably going to be much harder to get at the end of this week. So he's a name that had probably the biggest jump into the top 16, along with Cade McDonald, who's at the 14 spot, all the way from 48. And he's had back-to-back games. He's only had 2 games for Miami, Ohio, but he's had 8 catches for over 100 yards in each of those games, and he managed to also get a touchdown this week. So those are your 2 names that a lot of people, frankly, probably aren't nearly as familiar with because they're a group of 5 guys who hadn't been here at the top. The third name is Brendan Presley from Oklahoma State. Uh, he had a 16.9-point game, which matches what he did in week 1. And in the middle there, he had a 30.4-point game. So the combination of, consistently getting over 16, closer to even 17 points has now, boosted him up to, the top 16 at the 15 spot from 22. So he was always kind of hovering around there. He was a top 25 guy, but now he's in the top 16. Jeremiah Smith, just from sitting out, having a bye, managed to move up from 15 to number 8 because his average, stayed steady at 25.1. But, anybody stand out here, Willie, that made a move to you on the wide receiver list before we make our picks?
I mean, not other than the guys that you mentioned. I mean, we spoke a little bit about Cade. I think last week, or
Cade
I
McDonald, yep.
want to, yeah, I want to say it was last week. And then you've been a big proponent of Devontae Ross, so
Right.
no surprise that that it was coming.
Mm-hmm.
But Jalen Noel, I've been talking about him a little bit with Iowa State.
Mm-hmm.
I like where he's positioning himself on the list,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just really, say what you will, Travis Hunter, for him to be, playing both sides of the ball and to be where he is, that
Mm-hmm.
is just outstanding. It's outstanding and amazing. And then
Right.
Nick Nash is making himself some money.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah. And Nash is a name that, you know, routine, college fantasy, players should be familiar with. He's kind of been up and down as far as his CFF career, but he's certainly a guy who's flashed and had some big games at his time there at San Jose State. So he's not necessarily a newcomer, but he is new, as a regular here in the top 16. But he's definitely flashed and had some, big games in his career. But it's good to see, he's showing that, week 1 or the start of the season in general, aren't a fluke. And, he's who expected him to improve and get even better, after a really solid first couple of weeks. And to be averaging 41.2 after 3 games is quite impressive. So just based on that alone, he's going to have some really bad games down the line to ever leave this list. So he's looking like a good top 5 or top 6 candidate for the end of the year. So, all right. So now I did pick tight ends first, so we'll let you go first here with your wide receiver pick.
Okay, so we're going to go with the hot hand in the wide receiver position, and that's going to be Nick Nash. San Jose State, they go to Washington State, which should be one of the higher scoring games of the week. He's proven he's going to be on this list. I don't see the belly flop or anything like that. So Nick Nash, I'm going to go ahead and predict that he has about 36 points this week.
Yeah, and I know you also like his quarterback a lot, who none of us really knew much about before the season. Is it Emmett Brown?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So he's been having a good
That's
season as
him.
well. And what you got to like with a guy like Nash is he has a counterpart out there with Lockhart, who's also been around for quite a while, another veteran on the San Jose State team. So, teams can't necessarily just hone in on Nash and try to lock him down because you got a guy who is really good on the other side with Lockhart. So I like that pick a lot. Washington State, we know they're going to put up points, and um, if you've got Nash, you almost hope that they're playing from behind that whole game because they're going to have to just keep throwing the ball. So that's a really good pick. Um, I'd like to go with a guy like Ty Felton again. He's been a guy that I've championed in the off season and as we've been going here in the early part of this season. But I really don't like the fact that they are playing Villanova. I think that might work against him this week. Maybe they decide to give him a little break. Sorry, Willie, I tricked you. I'm not going with Felton because of the Villanova matchup.
Oh,
I saw you move in the circle
okay.
there. Yeah, I think I'm going to stay away from him as much as the matchup is good for Maryland. I don't know that they need to target
Hmm.
him as much in this game as they have. So I'm going to go with a guy that everybody loved in the first 2 weeks, which is Pena against Stanford. I'm just not going to run away from a guy that's had 2 touchdowns in each of his first 2 games. I like the matchup against Stanford. Pass D, uh, Stanford's going to be putting up points as well. Their offense is much better than it was last year. So uh, you just hope for a good back and forth there, and Pena can uh, at least get half the number of touchdowns he's been getting all year long with the two. So go a little bit of a
Yeah.
flyer here with Pena at the number 5 wide receiver spot.
Well, it's the first time you've tricked me on that this year, so that's good. And then the fact that okay, so we're saying is Syracuse offense this good, or is it the Stanford D that this is this bad? Because so you went with Pena, I went with Gadsden,
Right, right.
so
Yeah, we
it should
both
be
like that
interesting.
matchup. We both like what we're seeing there from. I think it's a little bit of both. I think we've seen enough to actually believe that the offense is much better at Syracuse with McCord at the helm, and we like what we see as far as playing people against Stanford so far. So let's
Hmm.
let's put them both in.
Yeah. All right. So going with my worst, I don't see, well, actually, I saw something else that I don't like, but I'm going to go ahead and say and take Cade McDonald
Hmm.
against they're playing at Notre Dame. That may be the
Hmm.
reason why. I see one other one that I think that I may have should have taken, but we're going to go Cade
Okay.
McDonald.
Yeah. And we know Notre Dame lost to NIU, but even in that game, it wasn't the quarterback and the receiver that dominated the stat line from NIU. It was the running back. So I agree that Notre Dame secondaries and defense in general is pretty tough. Um, I'm going to pick the guy that I think you were probably looking at, which is Brennan Presley against Utah. Is that who it was?
No, actually, no, it was actually
Okay.
Armstrong is who I was thinking of
Oh,
actually.
Andrew Armstrong. Yeah, he's been in the 20s every single game. He's sitting there at the number 12 wide receiver going against
Hmm.
Auburn. But yeah, I like Presley to be near the bottom. And we say this a lot because we're looking at a top 16 of all receivers this year. So it's not that we necessarily expect the player we pick as the worst game to be the horrible, but among this group of 16, I think Presley will struggle uh, the most as far as having a big game, meaning like he may not get over 20 against Utah in their defense. And you've got other guys emerging that are taking some targets away there with Stribling. They've got to get Ollie Gordon going. We'll talk about him here in just a minute, but
Hmm.
yeah, Brendan Presley's my prediction there for your worst performer.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
And I'd like that, based on where we're going next. So,
okay. All right. So, yeah, moving to the running backs, we are looking at a group that had a lot of turnover this week. You had six out of the top 16 uh, move out. You had 6 new names move in. But beginning with our picks and recapping, how we did, Willie B actually was shut out here. As good as he did at
hmm.
receiver, he didn't get any points at running back. Uh, but kind of looking at the worst first, I had predicted that Sloan from Ball State, who came out as their volume pig for week 2, because they didn't play in week 1, was going to get slowed down by Miami's defense, and that's exactly what happened. He only ended up with 5 carries after I think having 20 plus in their first game. Had 5 carries in week 3 against Miami and only had 9 point. Well, he had 9.4, not absolutely horrific, but was enough to be the third worst running back and got me a point. Uh, Ollie Gordon, who we just mentioned, and we'll touch on maybe in more detail here in a minute, only had 5.5 points against Tulsa. And then Griffin, who I gave a lot of credit to last week, is proving me wrong in week two. Uh, Ended up with only, only 4.3 points. And kind of the theory I threw out there in week one and I thought was inaccurate going into week two might turn out to be true. Now, this week, I said, well, maybe Griffin and Hankerson from Oregon State are going to be more of a 1A, 1B, whereas I thought Hankerson might be the one and Griffin the two. Well, as soon as I give Griffin the benefit of the doubt. He has the worst performance of the top 16 with only 3 or 4 points, and I think he only has 17 compared to Hankerson's 17 or so carries. So that one's got me all confused with what's going on there in Oregon State. But that's just a little interesting nugget. As far as your best running backs, Dylan Sampson from Tennessee and that entire team just continues to roll. He had 35.5. Parrish from Ole Miss, who, by
I'll
the way,
never doubt you again, sir.
yeah, Willie B. That was Willie B's pick for the worst, but I guess he heard about it and proved Willie wrong with 31.4. And then kind of the waiver darling of last week, Caleb Johnson, the guy that all the free agent bucks were being thrown at, didn't disappoint those that spent their bank on him. He got 31.3 points as the third best performer, and
I think it was he third or
maybe it was
he was up
yeah,
there. I want to say that Sloan. I had
or was he
Sloan
fourth? Yeah,
penciled in as fourth, but yeah, no, he was actually fourth. But in our scoring system, Sloan ends up being four. So yeah, he was the fourth best as far as like the most points. So I was pretty close.
yeah. I'm
I was
trying. I
pretty
guess
close.
maybe I took just an incorrect note. I thought Johnson was the
Yeah,
third best, and you got a point. So,
yeah,
um,
no, I didn't get any points for Johnson.
all right, but you still steered people right. Predicting he'd have that big game. He got over 30, which is what you're looking for. You had a few handful of really fun players here on buys with Monangai and Ginty out. Terrion Stewart from Bowling Green. It'll be interesting to see this week if he can maintain that spot up there where he was tied for number two. Um, but let's go ahead and look at how the standings shook up this week based on the performances. Obviously, with the bye, Ginty stayed at number one. R.J. Harvey had a big week. I think that's actually the guy that I missed that had the third best performance ahead of Caleb Johnson. So he's up to 35.5 points a game, and he had been at 32. So yeah, that's the guy I missed that had a big game last week. Um, Dylan Sampson's holding tight there, at the number three spot, and then those are your top guys. Stewart had a bye, so he's holding on to number four along with Monangai right after him. The big name that bounced back, and it looked like he was injured in this game. I don't know if he came back or not, so it's going to be a common theme to keep an eye on Darius Taylor and his health. But regardless, he still had a huge game in the 30s and bounced from number 31 running back up to number 8 back onto the list. What are your thoughts on Taylor at this point, Willie? I mean, there were a lot of pro Taylor folks on Twitter, saying it's great to have him back. But I did see him leave the game for a while. But he still managed over 30. But are you buying or selling your Darius Taylor stock at this point?
Well, I mean, I didn't have much stock in him only because of his usage.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the fact that they're keeping him under 15 carries a game,
Mm-hmm.
which is, I don't think that was happening last year. I want to say he was, in the range of what, 20 to 30s at times. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it was absurd. And, you just kind of running the kid into the ground. So, I mean, I like where he is as far as him staying under 15 carries. So if
Mm-hmm.
they can continue to do that, he can continue to find the end zone, then yeah, the stock will rise for him.
Right.
So and with the transfers that they brought in, there's really no reason for them to run him
Run him
that
into the
much.
ground.
And
Yeah. Yep.
yeah, there's no reason. And so I mean, and if you are in contention in the conference, then yes, let him be the bell cow once conference play comes, and then we'll
Mm-hmm.
see where things shake out. But there's no reason to do that this early, which I like that they're not doing that right now.
Right, right. Okay. A couple other new names here. We mentioned a few that had moved out of the list as far as Sloan, Ollie Gordon, Griffin. But another guy that people were spending a lot of their pickups on their free agent bucks was Tyus from Ohio. He moved back in. He's at number 12 now, moving up from 18. A guy who had a big week one and had everybody going after him early. And then the guy I just mentioned, the other guy at Oregon State, is now back on the list while his counterpart is off the list. Hankerson is back on at 13, up from 29. So, maybe they're just going to rotate. Well, we need to see one more game before we, can maybe figure out what's going on there at Oregon State. Tootin, a name a lot of people are familiar with from being kind of on the waiver watch all year last year from Virginia Tech. And then Scatabo, maybe a little surprising he took this long to get on here as much as they've used him this year, but he really was getting all the carries and a lot of the yards, but he wasn't hitting the end zone. So he finally did enough to make his way on here with a 23.2 average per game at the number 15 spot. And then Nick Singleton is kind of broken away from Allen there to kind of solidify himself as the top dog at Penn State. He's the number 16 running back and is new to the list with 23
Okay.
points a game. But
So
yep,
let's go back one step here, and we talk about Scatabo. So when
yep,
we're talking about him, he has 57
hmm
attempts in the last two games.
yep,
Now, do we expect him to be able to handle that at his size? I mean, he and Taylor are about the same size. They don't necessarily have the same lower body build, but
hmm
this is something that could potentially break him down going forward if he has to be the one to carry it like he does.
yeah.
Now,
Because as
we
much as you like to see him run the way he does, he runs with no fear. Um, and he's not afraid to lower his shoulder. He's not afraid to lower his head. He's trying to run guys over and is putting him not afraid to put himself at risk. So I see your point. And so, what's your advice if people have Scatabo? Are you saying kind of look at gr- grabbing the running
you
back
better,
two
yeah.
there at Arizona State early, just in
Yeah,
case?
yeah. I mean, I'd grab the two, and then possibly, depending on how deep the league is, I'll grab the third. I mean, because
Right.
if they're really wanting to run this ball like they're doing with him,
hmm
and hopefully you've recruited well, that you have someone decent to where you don't have to change your scheme,
Right.
obviously.
Right.
So I'd grab the second and possibly the third. I mean,
Right.
but I just don't see that he can carry it like he is,
hmm
and surviving this
And
whole season.
yeah, yeah, because they're he's taking
That's a
quite a
lot of
beating here.
carries.
Yeah,
Yes, that's
yeah.
just a lot of carries.
Yeah. All right. And then before the picks, your quick take on what do you have any? Do we know what's going wrong with Ollie Gordon? Are they just not giving him enough carries?
Well,
Is it a good thing for them as a team that they're not having to rely on him, or are they seeing him being keyed on and now they're just passing the ball more? What are you
well,
seeing there?
it's my frustration with Gundy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, don't come out and say you're doing something and then do the opposite. I'd rather just not say anything. Give me the coach speak. Don't come out and to
Mm-hmm.
lie to me though. Don't come out
Right.
and lie and say, because he didn't get suspended. The thing with the DUI, I get it and this and that. What is he? Is this his punishment?
Mm-hmm.
He's playing, but you're not giving him the ball. Is this the
Right.
punishment?
Right.
Come out and say
Yeah.
that if that's the
Right.
case.
I, I'm gonna lean towards maybe it's not as deliberate as that, and I would hope they're just kind of taking what the defenses are giving them. And can't say I've watched the games close enough to know if like teams are stacking the box, and that's why you're seeing Bowman and Presley and Stribling have better seasons now because it's opening up the pass game. But I would like to think there's a little bit of that going on, and my assessment would be don't expect the 30-point Ollie Gordon at any point this season now, as far as having that kind of a number on a consistent basis. But I don't think you should expect 5 points a game from him either. But I think he kind of just based on how teams are treating Oklahoma State and keying on him, I think you just lower your expectations and he becomes a guy that is still starter worthy for now, But you should probably expect, 17 to 20 points, maybe 18 to 22 in that range. Um, but he's not going to perform like Gene T this season, in my opinion. And they're they're
Well, and
they're
that
they're a more
well to
balanced
me,
team.
yeah, to me, then that's absurd. And why is he? Unless he had the eligibility, unless he just couldn't go into the draft. Why is he still there? Why is he still
Right,
on campus?
right,
Because what defenses should be getting is a healthy dose of your best player.
right, right.
I'm sorry, but
So, yep.
and we'll see once you get into the further into the Big 12, and then we don't have these cream puff things, but you know I don't like that aspect of you have your best players and then
Hmm.
you're not using them.
Right. Right. I hear you. I completely understand. And maybe while I get ready to make my pick, maybe you can see who they're playing this week. I'm curious now. I can't remember. I'm going first here, right, for running backs?
I believe you are, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Um, the better part of me just really is looking at Gene T coming off of a bye, playing Portland State, and saying there's no way they can keep him contained, even if he only plays a half of football. Um, so why fight against that? I'm just going to go with kind of what seems to be the clear and obvious pick, and that's the guy that's at number one with 53 points a game, Ashton Jeanty. If they were playing Portland State, not coming off a bye, I probably would not have picked him. But I think coming off of a bye, he's been rested. You don't have to go into this game saying we need to rest him. So you're going to see the best of what Ginty has in his first half, and it should be enough to make you happy. Even if he only gets 25 points this week, which is not even half of what he's been doing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
All right. I was trying to get you that
Ollie
matchup, but
Gordon, yeah, don't worry, we can go back to it.
let's see. I'm gonna go with yeah, I learned my lesson. So
Hmm.
RJ is on the bye. We
Hmm.
know how I felt about what he was going to do this season.
Hmm.
So I'm gonna give Henry Parrish his flowers, and
Okay.
they got Georgia Southern,
Right.
who's 131st according to Fantrax against running backs.
Right.
Um, let's see what he can do. Um,
I like it.
let's see if he moves up the list. I
Yeah.
think
Hey,
he
when a guy
can.
makes you look bad,
Yeah.
it's okay then to reverse it and put your circle around him. So
Yeah, I
I
mean
like it.
he's got 6 touchdowns in the last two games.
Hmm.
He wasn't even asked to do anything other than put on his uniform against Furman. So
Hmm.
um, yeah, I expect him to get in the end zone at least once.
Okay. Well, my pick for worst probably won't surprise you once I say it. Um, Like, and even on this list, it just makes sense. I'm gonna put my X over Tootin from Virginia Tech. They're playing against Rutgers.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody that knows anything about Greg Schiano's history knows that he's a defensive-oriented coach. That's why you traditionally haven't seen a lot of Rutgers players pop out as far as CFF potential. That the focus is defense, defense, defense. They're 36 against running back so far this year. They look much improved. Uh, and I think Tootin struggles against what is always a tough Rutgers defense this week.
Yeah, you kind of took my guy there. So
Okay.
yeah, I mean that, to me it was just kind of like the obvious
Mm-hmm.
kind of choice.
All right.
Um, But I'll go a different route here.
Okay. I see two that I
And
might have chosen. Let's see if you pick
yeah,
one of them.
I see one. I'm gonna say let's. I didn't move your Genty pick. Let me get that up there so we
Okay.
don't forget that. Let's go Dean Connors at Army.
Yep. That's what I was thinking. Yep.
Good. Yeah. Like you said, worst case is well, like yeah, worst case they're gonna run out of time.
Yeah, he's
That's
gonna
gonna be
have
the main
limited
thing.
carries, limited
Yeah,
opportunities. Yeah.
right. So
Yep. Yep. They slow the game down. And Connors is a good back, and having a solid season like everyone expected. But among this group, he'll probably have the fewest opportunities, for carries.
right.
And that's what we think. So, um, with that, let's go to the quarterbacks to wrap this thing up.
All right.
And looking at last week's performances, we have Willie B and myself both with 2 points. We got them in different ways. Um, starting with the top performer, it was Milrow with 39.3, which none of us had. He's had a very good year. I don't think anybody's doubting, that Milrow is going to be on this list all year long, without a doubt, in my opinion. But Willie
Hmm.
B put his faith in last year's Mr. Inconsistent, who is now becoming, Mr. Consistent for Ole Miss, Jackson Dart, who had 32.6 points, a little lower than his average at 34.9, but enough to be the second best quarterback. And and get Willie. Would you get 1 point or
I
2 points here?
I got 1 point for him because he was the third best on the list.
Right, right.
But let's go ahead and say this too.
Okay,
He's still trending in the same direction he always has.
okay.
So he had 45.4,
Mm-hmm.
24.3, and
Yep.
then he comes back with a 32.6.
Okay.
So
So,
he
but
should
not
trend down this week,
right,
but
but not at the extreme level we saw last year, where
no,
he would be in the
absolutely not.
20s or 30s, and then the single digits or low teens. So, I
Right.
think I think if he's trending, he's if he's got 22 or 24 as his low, you'll take that as your every week starter for sure with Dart.
Well, he's trending toward being a consistent starting top 12 quarterback as opposed to Mr. Hit and Miss.
Right, right, right. Yeah, and Ward was your second best quarterback there for Miami with 33.8. Misspoke. Dart, yeah, had the third best performance to get Willie as
Hmm.
one. Willie got his other point for predicting Rayner as his worst, who ended up being the third worst with 5.6, going against Michigan. I think that one was, one that you definitely should have stayed away from, and hopefully you did. I picked the quarterback with the other tough matchup with Samanza, who debuted on the list after his week 2 game at number 6, but is now off the list after a 2-point performance against Miami. And the game, it's interesting. The worst quarterback was Thorne from Auburn. He did not play. However, it was the coach's decision. He was healthy, and
Right.
they just benched him, so he counted as a zero. His average is incorrect in Fantrax, by the way. He's being listed as 2 games played, so they've kind of distorted his average there. But it was a zero. It was a legitimate zero for Thorne. So we'll be factoring that in when we do his average. So he's now off the list, which you'll see when we move to the next page. But there were 5 out of the 16 quarterbacks that got bounced. Uh, Samanza, Rayner, Thorne, and then the other 2 were Calandria, who just had kind of a pedestrian 17-point game. He was my pick to be the best. He was middle of the pack, very mediocre. And then Sorsby, um, you know, uh, he just in Cincinnati. He just didn't do a whole lot to stay on the list either. So with that, Willie, let's take a look at where things are now.
Okay.
You've got
I
yeah.
was looking. Did you make the note on where did Haynes finish up? Haynes.
With Yeah, that's funny. I thought I had the note there, but I guess
Okay. Okay.
I
Yeah.
guess it's
I didn't think I heard you say his name, so that I was just curious about him. So
yeah, and I'm positive I put it there, but I don't have it
I
for
got you.
some reason.
Yeah.
It's not showing up. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah. No
mean
worries.
he was
I'll
at,
pull him up.
so we looking at the list. He fell from number 11 with 30.5 a game, not
Hmm.
too far down. He's averaging
Yeah.
28 still.
He
So
still
he
he
just
had
moved down one.
23. Yeah. He had 23. So
Yeah, yeah. So
okay.
he's still holding steady with 28 points a game.
Yeah.
And what you'll see here is that Mateer's at the top with 37. Your number 16 quarterback is Cade Klubnik now, who moved into the 16 spot.
Hmm.
With 25.8. Uh, Again, following a bye, so that shows you that you have so many other quarterbacks, go down in their points per game. I mean, what you'll see here is what always happens. The leaders will end up around 30 to 35, but the guys here at the 14, 15, 16 spot will certainly be falling down to that 21 to 22 points a game. So we're still seeing guys with skewed averages here compared to what you'll see later. But Klubnik is one of the new guys who moved up. Josh Hoover had a really solid game and moved from 37 to 15 playing against UCF. Um, you got Horvath from Navy, who's showing up now, doing everything down there at Navy. He's averaging 27.2, and then you've got the Pittsburgh quarterback that we've all talked about, Holstein, who moved up from 21 to 13, who's now on the list, along with Baron Morton. Whom actually no, Morton I think is incorrect from being 20. I think that's another person's number there that I didn't change, but. Yeah, those are your five new guys there: Horvath, Klubnik, Hoover, Holstein, and Baron Morton. So
Mm.
um, with that, at the top, Mateer, Milrow, Dart, Giovanni Lopez holds on to a spot now that he's back after South Alabama is 87 to 10 they won. Willie?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, crazy. It's going to be interesting now. They're playing App State. That's a huge game in the Sun Belt this week. That should be a lot of fun. But we'll jump into the picks here and,
Well,
talk about the
well,
matchups.
they weren't looking past their matchup to App State. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, they definitely didn't fall into a trap game there at Southern Alabama. And they've got their starter back, Lopez. He's healthy again. And, they're warmed up and ready to go. So that should really be a good game there for the Sun Belt to open it up there for USA and App State. So curious, App State showing 125th against the pass. Will you take Lopez as your top quarterback? Which way are you going to go with?
Uh, I was looking at to see, I wish, some of our notes, we kept the lower level defenses
Mm-hmm.
and we don't unfortunately. So um, I'm gonna still go with the guys who have the top. I'm I, Mateer is your guy.
Yeah.
You've been high on him.
Mm-hmm.
In the preseason. You've always loved Washington State's quarterbacks,
Right.
so
Right.
I won't go there.
Okay.
Um,
You're leaving him there in case I want him.
yeah, I'm gonna leave him there just in case you do want him.
Okay.
Um, I'm actually gonna go with my I'm gonna go with my worst first here,
Okay. Go ahead.
and I'm gonna take. I just don't think that the number is gonna stay what he's been doing. So I'm
Uh-huh.
gonna I'm gonna take Dampier.
Okay, that's who I was looking at. So I'm going to see if I can find a guy
Okay,
to go the other way, just so there's a little bit of a mix here. Okay.
that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting that we were
Yep.
kind of thinking the same thing there.
Yeah, that's a. I mean, Fresno State's defense is proven to be pretty tough there. So I like what they're showing. They had the shutout this week. I think it was 48-0. That was actually on Bad Beats. It
Mm,
was 48-0 in the beginning of the third quarter, and they still didn't get the over of 49. It's on
wow.
Bad Beats on ESPN this week. Yeah,
And like I
but
said, I mean, it's still your choice. I mean, you could still take your favorite
no,
or
I'll spread it
most.
out a little bit. I mean, as good as he's doing, I love the Navy quarterback there, Horvath. But Memphis has just proven to be a great all-around team so far this season. So I'll take the Navy quarterback and say that his time in the top 16 is going to be short-lived, and he'll be the worst producer there. This week among the quarterbacks. In worst case, he'll be second worst next to Dampier.
Hmm. And so for my best,
There's some good options here.
there are some great options.
We've even got
Yeah,
McCord, who
yeah,
we both took a
yeah,
receiver from.
yes. We talked about him. A
Jackson Dart at
Holstein,
Georgia Southern.
yep, a Holstein I like there. Only just because of what they've done. But Youngstown, that's
Yep.
too much of a cream puff. I think
Right.
I don't
Yep.
think that's even going to be enough.
I'm with you
Um,
on that.
so so, oof. Here's a
Hey, look
guy
at
that I've
Chandler
been.
Morris. Yeah, Chandler Morris in Wyoming is a great matchup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hayes King, he's going to have to do everything. Playing Louisville, so he's going to run the
Right.
football. So that's a good one.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So no matter who we choose here, there are going to be other options. This is a
Yep.
great week for the guys that are on this list. So if you
Right.
have someone on this list, feel comfortable that you have a pretty good chance of success. So with that
Right.
being said, I am going to go ahead and I'll go with one of the battles of Florida. So we're going to go Cam Ward. They go to UCF,
Okay.
who is 112th.
That's a
But
good. Yeah, I didn't know you were going to lean that way. That's another good one. I just didn't talk about just now.
yeah, and that was a little on purpose. I didn't want to give it away just yet.
Right. Okay. I like it. Okay. Um, well, as I mentioned the other ones that I like there, just so that people would hear that I think there are plenty of options. But since you left the door open for me, even though it's showing that the San Jose State
Hmm.
secondary is great against quarterbacks and you should not play them, I think it's a case where you know even though there is no Pac-12 for real, Washington State still has a Pac-12 team. They've got this G5 schedule coming up where they're going to basically be a Mountain West participant by default. So Mateer is going to keep it rolling, starting here with a big game against San Jose State. I'll
But I
take
will say,
Mateer.
yeah, I will say that San Jose State's defense, they're 12th against the pass.
Yep,
They've only given up one passing touchdown, and they
yep.
have six interceptions.
There you go. That's pretty damn good. But
Yeah,
I don't think any of
so
that matters against Washington State. Is what I'm saying. I think you should
yeah,
still be
I agree.
confident. They will be
I agree.
overmatched, and Washington State has looked extremely good this year as a team. I think they're just kind of pissed off that they're kind of dangling out there with Oregon State as the only members of the Pac-12, and they got something to prove.
Well, I mean, they did get that little bump. So, I mean, technically, you have the new members coming in. So this can be matchups for the future. So
Right.
we'll see what happens. But I
All
do
right.
think that, like we said before, this is still going to be one of the I think is going to be one of the high scoring and entertaining games of the week. So
Right.
it'll
No,
be real interesting to watch.
yeah. Last week, it's always great to just have football. I just think last week was one of the early duds as far as the week as a whole. Without kind of the big marquee matchups. I mean, you had Georgia get a scare, but it's not. That wasn't like a highly anticipated game by anyone. That had a lot of build
Right.
up. It became fun to watch towards the end when you saw Georgia was kind of in a battle there. But yeah, I think this week. I mean, you've got Tennessee playing Oklahoma for crying out loud. That like it doesn't get
Hmm.
better than like seeing Oklahoma start their Southeast Conference tenure here. So
Right.
what are you thinking on that game, by the way? And then we'll close out.
I like I
I
said,
mean,
I would expect that, it's going to be one of those, it's going to be a lot more high scoring than most people think. Um, Typically in the past, this is when Oklahoma would open up their offense and then you'd actually see what they're really going to be going
uh-huh.
forward. So I expect a little bit of that. And the big question is, can Jackson Arnold um, show that he's that big man on campus? Because
Yep.
if he's not, it could get out of hand real quickly.
Yeah, I love the backstory that you've got former Oklahoma offensive coordinator going against the defensive coordinator that was there at the same time. With Venables as the head coach, you got both of them as head coaches now playing each other. It's like an old red white scrimmage here.
Yeah, I will still say, even though back then to me, it still wasn't on the same level.
Hmm.
I hope that even now it's not, but we'll see. Uh,
Yep.
they do have Tennessee. They do have a lot of firepower. That's for sure.
Yeah,
So
I mean, and
it's
if there's a defensive minded coach that can slow them down, it would be Venables. But
hmm
and this is why you hire a coach like Venables if you're
absolutely
going to go defensively, is to try to shut down teams like this that have been scoring 60 points by halftime. So we'll
right.
see if Oklahoma can hold them even under 38. I think that's going to be tough, but Yeah, I think I'll go out and say, Tennessee still with 31, Oklahoma 20,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah. I mean, we talked about this a little bit, just kind of like in passing, and but you always, the switcher, you want to have 100 on them.
Oh, yeah.
Oklahoma has, they haven't had that lately.
Hmm.
So, and Tennessee, to me, they just feel like that they're a team that can easily do that if they really wanted to. That's to
Yeah,
me is going to be the difference. So it's really going to be the onus is going to be on the defense, but it's really going to be on Jackson and the offense to keep the chains moving, uh, limit your mistakes, and help your defense out.
right. Yeah, you have to this week for sure. You got to have some longer drives than usual to keep Tennessee off the field. But with
Right.
that, we've talked enough. We will wrap it up. We wish everybody luck.